Module 7, feel your fullness. So back in Module 2, we looked at honouring your hunger, and you were invited to start to explore your relationship with hunger and how years and years of dieting mentality and dieting rules actually disassociate us from our actual physical hunger cues, biological hunger cues. So you were invited to start to pay a bit more attention to the physical signs that your body gives you when it's starting to get hungry. You know, diets over the years have taught us to ignore and even celebrate our hunger cues. So becoming more attuned to when we are actually physically hungry and then feeding ourselves when we experience physical hunger is such an important part of freeing ourselves from the clutches of dieting mentality and finding food freedom. So this week is about recognizing fullness. And again, you know, dieting mentality has really played with our sense of fullness. We eat very distracted these days. You know, quite often we don't just sit down and make the eating about the eating. Quite often we'll have the TV on or our phones there, or we'll be having conversations with the family. It is just modern living, but it's really hard to recognise our biological cues for fullness when we have other distractions going on. You know, then we heap in the whole kind of beliefs that we got growing up around finishing everything on our plate, and you know, recognising those early signs of getting full can be really, really lost amidst physical noise going on around us, but also our internal noise in terms of our belief system around finishing everything on our plate. So this module is all about you starting to explore your current relationship with recognizing fullness. And over this module, you're going to have you're invited to explore distractions. There's going to be a little self-assessment there for you to do around your current eating patterns and how much distraction there is going on around you when you do sit down to eat. We're also going to look at and consider eating as a sacred time, and again there's going to be a little exercise in there for you that is going to get you to start moving away from your current levels of distracted eating and creating a space where eating becomes the primary thing. And then once you start to do that, it's amazing how you then start to tune in to recognizing when you're starting to get full. And there's some lovely little exercises for you to do in this module that are going to be practical steps for you to take that are going to help you to start become much more attuned to when your body is giving you that sense of full. And the more you practice these techniques, the more you'll start to recognize your fullness levels much sooner. So, you know, these two things that we've worked on, honoring your hunger, so starting to actually recognize when you're hungry and feeding yourself when you're hungry, but also starting to become much more slowing the whole process of eating down, making the eating process about eating, so you start to actually recognize your fullness cues. So what we're starting to do here is give you some techniques that are actually going to start to get you much more attuned to your hunger, but also your fullness. So we're also going to have a little look at the Clean Plate Club. You know, most of us grew up with that our parents telling us we needed to finish everything on our plate. So there's almost like that moral attachment and feeling wrong if we don't eat anything. And of course we don't think that every time we finish our plate. It's just become habit that we do finish everything on our plate. And it's not just about what's on our plate. You know, a lot of people have that mentality. If they open a packet of biscuits, they have to eat the whole thing, or if they have a bar of chocolate, they have to have the whole thing. So we're going to explore that a little bit in this module this week as well. We're going to then start introducing some habit disruptors, you know, because this is what this is all about. This is about exploring and understanding your current patterns, your current habits, and then finding ways to interrupt those patterns. And so if you're somebody that does tend to clean everything on your plate, or only recognise fullness when you're absolutely stuffed to the brim, or when everything has gone on your plate, what we want to do is start introducing some habit disruptors that are going to help you to recognize your fullness a lot sooner. Yes, one of the exercises we're going to do is get you eating with your non-dominant hand. It's amazing because if you think, our dominant hand is often done very automatic, very autopilot, and eating is often done with our dominant hand. So that all feeds into this almost unconscious habit of eating, maybe tasting the first few mouthfuls, and only when we get to the end of the food on the plate or the end of the packet of crisps or whatever do we realise, sort of we almost wake up from that habitual way of eating. So one of the exercises I'm going to get you to do is actually eat with your opposite hand, and then to journal around how you found that experience. Did you recognise fullness much sooner? Did you leave things on your plate? Because it's in these little changes that we make that we have a new experience, and sometimes it's in those new experiences that we can really start to make big shifts in terms of these automatic patterns that have been going on. We're also going to explore fullness and also factors that influence our levels of fullness. So an opportunity there for you to just explore how you currently recognise fullness and what influences that. And there's going to be another experiment there for you to do, drinking a glass of water. And again, when you're sat there and you're actually attuned to what you're doing, how you start to recognise that those natural cues are there. But because we often eat very distracted, or we eat when we're stressed, or we're living from these points of finishing everything on our plate, so that just has become conditioned that we override these natural fullness cues. And the last thing that you're going to look at in this module is the last bite threshold. And I think this is a really popular one, whereby we may actually recognise that we're getting full, but we continue to eat everything that's on our plate anyway. So you're going to have an opportunity to do a little experiment where you're going to eat when you're feeling moderately hungry, and you're going to eat without distraction, so you're much more attuned to your biological cues of fullness. And then I'm going to invite you to stop eating around the time where you're starting to notice that you're getting full, and then estimate how many more mouthfuls of food you're going to need. This is all outlined in the workbook. How many more mouthfuls of food you think you're going to need until you're full. And this whole kind of exercise is about you starting to gauge just how much food you actually need. So recognizing when you're moderately hungry, eat moderately. When you start to actually recognize that you're moderately full, to put your knife and fork down, and then start to think, okay, how many more spoonfuls of food do I think I'm going to need? And this hasn't got to be set in stone. This isn't about being really rigid. It's about playing around with this stuff a little bit and building your confidence that actually you can start to recognise fullness. You can also give yourself permission to eat a few more mouthfuls, because what's also underpinning our levels of fullness is this belief that that food isn't going to be available again in the future. And although logically we know it is, our unconscious, because it's been so used to restriction and binging, it has this almost parallel worry going on around when that food will be available again. So practicing this last bite threshold is quite an interesting one, because it gets us starting to recognize when we are starting to feel full, but it also gives us permission to eat several more mouthfuls and then to assess again. So we're just slowing that whole process down of eating. So that's this week's module and training, guys. So it's all focused around helping you to explore and understand your current levels of fullness, distractions, what's getting in the way of you recognizing your fullness. And then there's some lovely little techniques and experiments for you to try out, to play around with. It's not about getting it right first time, but these are little techniques that if you practice them and you build them into your eating routines, you are going to start to become much more familiar when you're starting to feel full. Okay, any questions? Come and ask me, and I look forward to hearing how you get on with this training.